Hey everyone, welcome to today's MBTI Debrief. I am here with my friend and colleague, Bradyn. Hey Bradyn.
Hello.
We're continuing on the facets of the different preference pair, and today we're talking about the thinking feeling preference pair. So you have some questions for me, Bradyn? But some of our listeners won't have listened to the we've done two previous ones of these debriefs. So I think we might cover the basic questions in this one as well, if that's all right with you.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So what can I do for you today?
Well, I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about what a preference pair is.
Okay. So a preference pair, and we've covered this on our previous two debriefs, MBTI debriefs as well. A preference pair is a pair of words. It could be like today we're talking about thinking and feeling, and that's a thinking, feeling, preference pair. It's a pair of words that are used almost as opposites of each other. Of course, thinking and feeling are not the opposites of each other, but they are ways of describing a cognitive capacity or cognitive functioning in a way that is different from the other. Of course, thinking as a preference is very much attached to figuring things out, using the thinking faculties when making decisions predominantly. Whereas feeling as a preference, for those of us, like we're both INFJs, so we have the feeling functionality as the predominant functionality. So the feeling, of course, is basing decisions on things like, is this authentic? Is this the most harmonious thing for everyone? So that's what a preference pair is. It's basically, it's not exactly the opposites of each other, but it's different. It's a scale of differences in the functionality of how we operate.
Okay, so would you be able to explain a little bit about what the facets are within this next pair?
The thinking feeling pair. Sure. I might do the screen share once more, since it seems to work really well for this. You get a visual here. So this is actually from my report. You can see here, Merja Sumilov, INFJ, page 7, interpretive report on the Global Step 2 Myers-Briggs Type Indicator Assessment. And this here, you can see on the right-hand side of the page, we have the feeling preference. And on the left-hand side, we have the thinking preference. And also on the right-hand side, we have the facets that relate to the feeling preference. And on the left-hand side, we have the facets that relate to the thinking preference. So I'd like to go through, like we've done in the previous videos, debrief videos, I'd like to go through a little bit about how these different facets kind of show up in practicalities. Does that work for you, Bradyn?
Yes, that was actually one of the questions I had. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So you can see from this particular report that I have scored higher on the feeling the feeling aspect, or the feeling preference. As an INFJ, that's not a surprise because the F stands for feeling. But you can also see here, anything that's in blue is in preference, and anything that's in green is out of preference. So the blue F up here means that I am, in fact, a feeler. Now we're looking at these different facet pairs, like logical, empathetic, reasonable, compassionate, questioning, accommodating, critical, accepting, and tough and tender. And again, they're not exactly opposites of each other, but they are facets that are dissimilar to each other in the functionality, but they do relate to either the thinking or the feeling preference individually. So if that makes sense. Let's talk about the logical empathetic first, because this is, I think, probably one of the main things that people think about when they think about thinking feeling as a preference pair. And so thinking people do describe themselves as impartial, analytical, and they seek clarity. So they don't get emotionally involved in the decision. Whereas empathetic people, which is what a lot of feeling people would how they would describe themselves, say, you know, they're personal and supportive and they seek harmony. Now, if you look at the difference between the two ends of this particular stick here, the logical people predominantly seek clarity, whereas the empathetic people predominantly seek harmony, whether that's harmony with yourself or with other people. So there is a difference in how those two facets show up in the world, and how they also really well complement each other if used well. But the beauty of knowing whether you yourself are more logical or empathetic is that you learn how you are wired, like what is driving you. Is seeking clarity driving you? You know, do you want clarity, or is it harmony that's driving you? So this is, for me, from what I've seen with people that I've worked with, thousands of people that I've worked with all around the world, this logical empathetic piece, preference, facet pair within the thinking feeling preference pair, seems to be the one that most people think about when they think whether they're a thinker or a feeler. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know that's like a really
true.
windy way windy way of saying.
Yeah,
and as you can see, for me, I'm here in the mid zone. So I'm leaning toward the empathetic, the seeking more harmony. But also there's a part of me that's very much about seeking clarity and analyzing things and being impartial. So, and that's not actually unusual for INFJs, because we do run with inward facing intuition. So we do tend to kind of step back and just observe a bit.
Yeah, I agree.
Where do you fall on this logical empathetic? Do you happen to remember?
Yeah, I've got my report up as well. So mine is more so, mine is in the mid zone, but more so out of preference. So it's on the 1 scale. Yes, there.
Okay, so
yeah.
Here.
I'm more
Yeah, so that's really interesting. Yeah. And we talked about in a previous video how we are the same Enneagram type, and our Enneagram type is very much about logic. And it shows here for both of us, in my mind, how, you know, how that's coming up. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have any particular like examples of, because for me, whenever I'm an INFJ, and this is particularly a point of contest in a lot of some of the forums online, where I am highly logical INFJ, and I can be often told that I can't be an INFJ because I'm not, because basically I have boundaries and I'm able to think critically, right? So
yeah.
It makes me an unusual INFJ in a way that, you know, I'm able to do that, but it still doesn't mean that I'm not an INFJ. Have you had any experiences around this logical empathetic piece for yourself?
Yeah, I think if a problem presents itself, I can be definitely empathetic in validating what it is myself or somebody else is feeling about a certain situation. But then I start thinking about a solution, or to seek clarity behind the why,
Right.
Investigating that a little bit more. Yeah.
So you attend to the wound, if you like, but then you want to solve the problem as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, shall we move on to reasonable, compassionate reference pair, or a facet pair?
Sounds
okay.
good.
So where it says reasonable, that doesn't mean that if you're compassionate that you're not a reasonable person, right? It's more it's more to do with the word reasonable. So reason is, you know, the truth, the cause and effect, and using of the principles. So it's all about what is the reason here, not so much, are you a reasonable person? It has nothing to do with that. And then the compassionate person is not as concerned with the reason as they are about putting something across in a way that really is received in the manner in which it's intended, so with good intent, right? So the compassionate people tend to be tactful and sympathetic, and they also value loyalty. So whereas the reasonable people are really focused on what is actually, like, what are the factual things outside of the human experience within this, whereas the compassionate person is all about, so let's take these individuals into consideration when, be it yourself or be it other people, when we're making decisions. So for me, you can see score 2 on the compassionate side for sure. I find this, especially when I'm communicating, so let's just say I'm out there in the world, just everyday interactions, at the shop or, meeting with the neighbors or whatever. And I am, and there's a problem that arises. For me, I would much rather not focus on the facts as much or the cause and effect as much as I would want to focus on how I'm going to put that message across to the other person so that they are able to hear it and that we can resolve the issue. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for me, it's more, the how is more important than the what in this case.
Right.
What about you?
I think in a situation like with your example, it would be something I can relate to. Because I'm trying to think of how to say this. So I don't want to be the person who seems quite rigid with the facts. So coming from a feeler perspective, it would be not to make somebody else feel any more uncomfortable if there was, you know what I mean, in a conflicting situation.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's more important to bring the facts in once everybody feels comfortable, as opposed to focus on the facts in order to set the starting point as factual?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I think that's
the play after. Yeah.
Right. And there is wisdom in bringing people together to communicate with similar things before you try to actually resolve problems. Yeah. But where that goes overboard, and where I've certainly seen that go overboard for me, is when I don't have good boundaries and I just let people drive their own agenda. So I don't set the boundaries up front early enough. So questioning, accommodating. So now we're looking at the thinking person, wanting to question things. So we have, they're worried about, am I being precise? I'm not afraid to challenge what's going on because I'm willing to question. I want discussion around what the facts are and what's actually going on, as opposed to just getting along and singing Kumbaya at the campfire. Yeah. Whereas the accommodating person would be more around, approving of others, like trying to get along and seeing people as they are, as opposed to focusing on the facts, being more agreeable, wanting to get along, and wanting consensus from people. So wanting people to come together and actually have consensus. So as you can see here for me, the questioning, like I'm in the mid zone, slightly leaning toward the accommodating. And personally, for me, it feels like I'm willing to be accommodating. Like that's my natural tendency, is to be accommodating, but I'm also willing to ask the questions just to gain the clarity and just to make sure that I'm actually making the best possible decisions based on the information that I have, because I feel perpetually that I don't have enough information, proper qualified information to make decisions on. So I'm really careful about knowing what I don't already know.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you would still come across, even though questioning, you would still be really accommodating to what the answers may be to make a well-informed decision.
Right. Right. Yeah. So not questioning for the sake of being questioning,
like
but
factual
questioning
and
for the sake of, so wanting to see, okay, what are my blind spots here? For sure. Yeah, I don't tend to have a preference or need to be right. Like if I have really well-formed opinions about something, you might feel like, when you're listening to me, you might feel like I sound like I want to be right, but it's not. It's just because I've formed that decision and questioned myself over a long period of time before I get to that point. People come and ask me, oh, what do you think about this? And most often, if it's something that I haven't thought about, most often my answer is, I don't have enough information to give you an opinion on it. So it's nice not to have an opinion about everything. But then when you do have an opinion about things, it's usually because you've thought about it and you've really gone into it and processed it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What about you? Where do you see yourself on that questioning, accommodating pair?
I am in preference, and I am sitting at number 2 from the mid zone.
So around here.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Do you find yourself, like, if you look at me and then you look at yourself, because we know each other relatively well, would you, like, how would you compare? So you're at 2 here, I'm over here in the mid zone. How do you feel, like, what are the differences that you see between you and I?
Let's not use you so much, but let's go with somebody on the scale more so in the questioning before I go to the differences between you and I. So for somebody who is more so feeling based and in preference with this, somebody who is consistently questioning me seems critical, overly critical.
Right. Got it.
They aren't taking into consideration like being very inclusive, and they're not coming to an agreement. Does that make so? They're not going to the straight line of like, all right, there is a problem. There's no need to consistently question for myself.
Yeah.
The difference between a little bit of a difference between you and I is oh, that's a tough one. Oh, I would say you would be very, and I don't know if this comes in with part of the intuition, but the way in which you ask the questioning doesn't come across as critical for me compared to someone who's more so on that out of preference side. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I think it's because I'm asking it from that accommodating, accepting space, as opposed to from the critical questioning space. So I don't want to lose the connection, if that makes sense. Whereas a person coming from the thinking side isn't wired around the connection as much.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. All right, critical and accepting. So we talked a little bit about this, but critical is more around being skeptical and wanting proof, and critique. And actually something that I've noticed about critical people who score highly in critical is that they perceive critique to be an act of support.
Oh,
which is interesting. Yeah.
that's
And
really
then
confusing for me.
and then on the other side, we have the accepting, where there's a lot of tolerance, trusting, and supporting others with praise. So this is, this is, to me, this critical accepting is actually more about how you're likely to support others. So are you likely to offer them critique to support them, or are you more likely to give praise to support other people? So that's interesting.
It is.
And as you probably know, like I don't do the critique as a standard, so this probably is no surprise for you here, this score that I have in preference towards accepting.
Yeah.
I would consider myself to be more praise oriented in general.
Orientated, yeah.
I'm not a skeptical person. I do want proof, but I'm not, like, how I offer critique is very empathetic and compassionate. So it's very much about, would you like to hear, I'm getting a sense of or some insight around this, would you like to hear it? And that's kind of the way, as opposed to just saying, Bradyn, you should do this way because it's just going to be better. You'll thank me later. Like, you'd never hear me say anything like that.
Yeah.
What about you? Where are you on that scale?
I am in number 5 in preference.
Wow.
Yeah.
Here, all the way here.
All the way. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find it difficult to give critique to other people? Like, if they said, just tell me what you think and don't sugarcoat it. Do you find that?
I hear that very often.
Do you?
And all the time. So I do find it really hard. Part of it is trying to think of terminology that wouldn't come across as too critical, too loose, as you mentioned before, like the connection. Even though I have permission, it's very, very challenging, because for me it's more about everybody can win, and also not believing that seeing good in everybody, right? Separating whatever it is that they've done towards you, they're still a good person, kind of thing. Yeah.
Like giving people the benefit of the doubt, so to speak. Like not judging their, so having a judgment around the action, but not judging their intent. Yeah. Whereas critique is very much like, assumes that your intent was that you're uneducated or incompetent.
That's very true. So boundaries work. So sorry, Maria, you go.
No, go for it. Please finish your thought.
Well, I was just going to say, I think having this assessment really gained insight into why boundaries work was really hard for me. It was hard for me to understand.
Yes. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And of course, for a critical person, a person who's on that thinking critical piece, they feel like when people give praise, it's like it's empty compliments. There's no point to like, why are you wasting time saying those things? So it's an interesting facet pair in particular.
Yeah, definitely.
And one of the reasons why it would be amazing to, if anybody's tuning in and you don't know what your facets are, this will explain a lot about you.
Yeah.
All right, tough and tender. So tough on the thinking side, about firm, tough-minded, focus on implementation, and tender is all about being gentle and tender-heartedness and focus on agreement. And as you can see here, I've scored 4 on that scale in preference, more toward tender. And I want to highlight a little difference, that I have a friend who's an ESTJ, and if ever I have a problem, I've stopped telling them that I have a problem. So I didn't speak to them for a while, because anytime I spoke to them I told them about the stalker, and they were just like, oh, chin up, you'll be right. This kind of tough-mindedness. And that wasn't actually helpful for me. So I didn't speak to them for quite some time. So I didn't feel like I was being taken seriously. And then I had some health issues, as you know, and I told them what was going on, and they were like, I didn't realize that it was this bad. And I just said to them, look at your previous messages, your responses to my messages in the past, and see if you can see if there's a pattern there. And they came back to me and they said, oh, I didn't, like, I acknowledged it and I wanted to encourage you to feel better, but obviously it didn't come across as helpful. So that's been an interesting piece there for me, from my own experience, where I need that tenderness and that hey, I hear what you're saying, I see you, I don't need you to change for me to feel better. Like I don't need to impose my toughness onto you. I can just let you be as you are.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting experience for me. That really opened my eyes to this particular facet there. What about you? Do you have a personal experience around this, and where do you land on that scale?
Yeah, I would say in a family dynamic, we have a few thinkers, and at times where I've gone to express or vent something that I'm struggling with, the response is just like with your friend with the example there, heavily weighs on me as if I wasn't being taken seriously, that it's not really that big of a deal. And to be fair, sometimes maybe it's not, but it's an emotional need of being able to feel validation in having somebody seen. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And someone actively listen to you is also something. So I mean, I'm actually surprised about where I've scaled on this, and I think that's where it's sort of weighed in a little bit by being around people who are orientated in the tough, in the out of preference for a feeler.
So where did you land?
I am number 2 in preference.
Okay. Yeah. So close to the mid zone. Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off there.
No, that's fine. No, that's okay. I mean, it's probably why when it comes to somebody who is more so out of preference in the thinking aspect, when I see them upset, it must be very bad. And so I think that's where they start to sort of warm up to me, because I am that person within our family who is more so warm, and the feeling stuff, which is fine for them, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's one role. So you're in preference with everything.
Yeah.
You're not even on. You didn't score any ones, did you?
No.
So you're all in preference. So so you'd be like super tender and oftentimes I find that, especially in family dynamics, that those of us who are intuitive tend to take on a role that balances out the environment. So it's not unusual that you have 1 or 2 people in the family that are like super tender, and then everybody else is super tough, or a lot of would certainly score higher on the tough scale. Well, this has been very interesting to me. I've found this super interesting, this particular preference pair, and looking at these facets within. And I like to think that we can all learn all of these facet behaviors to our capacity, to the capacity that we have to learn them. So that we can actually, that we don't have to just work within what our natural preference is, but that we also learn different ways of being, and that we learn that sometimes we do need to be tough. I gotta tell you, Bradyn, like when we had the bushfires 2019 here in Eastern Australia,
Yeah.
there was no time for tenderness, like for months until it was over.
Yeah.
And after that, then you dealt with what needed to be done. And up until then, it was fire prep, evacuation.
Yep.
You
Real
know,
logic.
making sure that you were safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No space for, you had empathy and compassion for other people, but you couldn't really stop. You couldn't. It was just relentless because it was coming from 4 different directions for us. So we didn't know. So depending on where the wind was blowing, we needed to be prepared. So it changed every day or every hour, and it was this whole thing. So you didn't really go into the accommodation mode. It was like, no, here's how it is. This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Is this the best way of actually doing this? Okay, it's not. Okay, let's change it. So there was no space really for emoting in those months, for sure.
Yeah. I think even though we score in preference, it doesn't mean that we haven't, part of personal development is being able to utilize and having conversations like these, doing assessments just like this, particularly on a personal level. You're able to sort of explore ways in which there would be scenarios just like that with the bushfires, how important it is to learn these things, be reasonable, be logical, etc.
100%.
Yeah
100%. Yeah, absolutely. So anybody tuning in, if you're curious about your own facets and you want to carry out this global step 2, or the whole, in fact, it's a part of a profiling package that we have, discovering yourself, self-discovery package that we do have. So do get in touch with us at desk@merjasomiloff.com. Happy to help. But my big takeaway from today has been really just looking at the positives in both, and something I could feel myself get a little bit judgmental about some of the words, and just reminding myself that, you know what, there's actually strength to every one of these facets, every one of these words that we use today to describe those different facets. What about you? What's your main takeaway today, Bradyn?
That for some people in the art of preference as a thinker, criticism is actually to them perceived as supportive. So that was new to me.
Yes. Yeah, and it is. Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. And it is, if you're working on a specific, like very cerebral project, a part of that is to get criticism, to get critique on it before you submit it. So that in that way, it might be easier to think about it as helpful. But yes, that is not something that especially a lot of feelers don't. For sure, 100%. Well, thanks, Bradyn, for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Maria.
I'm hoping to jump on a call with you again soon to do the final judging perceiving preference pairs, if you're up for that. So thank you, Bradyn. Thanks so much, and thanks for your personal experiences. I'll talk to you real soon.
No worries. See you. Bye.
Bye.